You're 22 and already haunted by the thought that you should have everything figured out. A career, a plan, a direction that makes you feel certain about the future. At 27, you scroll through endless feeds of people buying houses, starting companies, getting married, and quietly you tell yourself you're behind. At 35, you start believing you've missed your chance. You look back at the roads not taken, the choices you didn't make, and the silent weight of regret presses on your chest. And at 50, a thought creeps in like a shadow. Maybe it isn't even worth starting anymore. Maybe the page has already turned and the story is finished. But here's the truth you rarely hear. It is never too late. The idea of being too late is not reality, it's a story. A story crafted by comparison, by culture, by timelines that were never written for you in the first place. And yet you carry them as if they were carved into stone. You measure your life against the pace of others and call it failure when you don't match. But what if the race you're running isn't real? What if the finish line you fear has never existed? Think about it. Clocks and calendars were invented by us. The idea of milestones, graduate by this age, succeed by that age, settle down by another, is not nature's law. It's society's story. And stories can be rewritten. The fear of being too late is really the fear of being judged, the fear that others will look at you and see wasted time. But let me ask you this. Would you rather be judged for starting now or for never starting at all? Because the only thing worse than being late is believing you've run out of time. That belief is the prison. And in this video we're going to break it, by uncovering where this fear really comes from, by proving why life doesn't run on one single clock, and by showing you how to step into the only moment that actually matters. The fear of being too late does not spring from nowhere. It is carefully cultivated in you from the moment you begin to see yourself reflected in the eyes of others. Comparison is one of the oldest human instincts, born out of survival. In early societies, to compare meant to measure your own chances of belonging, of surviving, of finding your place in the tribe. But what once kept you alive now keeps you restless. Because today, comparison is no longer a glance at the neighbor's field. It is an endless theater of lives displayed on glowing screens, each moment edited and sharpened to convince you that everyone else is moving faster. Social media has accelerated the natural instinct of comparison into a permanent state of crisis. You no longer compare occasionally. You compare hourly, sometimes minute by minute. Neuroscientists studying dopamine have shown that these digital feeds work like slot machines, flooding the brain with tiny surges of pleasure when we see others winning and quietly punishing us when we feel behind. It creates an illusion not just of missing out, but of being fundamentally late to life itself. Culture reinforces this illusion by glorifying young success. The prodigy who made millions by 25, the author who published their masterpiece before 30, the entrepreneur who sold a company before you finished school. These stories dominate headlines not because they are common, but because they are rare, precisely because they are the exception, not the rule. Yet our minds do not see them as exceptions. Psychology calls this the availability heuristic, the tendency to believe something is more common simply because we hear about it more often. In truth, most lives unfold in silence, away from cameras, away from the curated narrative of early triumph. But silence does not make good stories, so you rarely see it. What is worse, these cultural timelines are treated as if they were universal laws. Graduate by 22nd, find stability by 30th, achieve greatness by 40th. Anything after is considered late. But time, as philosophy and science alike remind us, is not absolute in its meaning. Einstein himself shattered the notion of a universal clock when he showed that time is relative. It bends, stretches, and is experienced differently depending on where you stand. If even physics refuses the tyranny of a single timeline, why should you surrender your life to one? The truth is that much of your fear of being late is not your fear at all. It is borrowed. It belongs to a society that thrives on urgency, on selling you the idea that you are always one step behind and must catch up. Capitalism thrives on this wound. Every advertisement whispers the same lie. You are not enough, not yet. But buy this, achieve this, do this, and maybe you will be. The fear of lateness is profitable, and so it is repeated endlessly. But just because something is repeated does not make it real. So what is practical here? First, notice your triggers. When you feel the ache of being behind, ask, who told me this? Was it my own voice, or was it an image crafted by someone else's highlight reel? Second, ground yourself in evidence. Research on adult development shows that people do not stop evolving at 25 or even at 40. Studies in neuroplasticity demonstrate that the human brain can form new pathways, learn new skills, and adapt well into the 7th and 8th decades of life. If your biology itself has not placed an expiration date on growth, then why should you? Third, learn to see time not as a deadline, but as a resource. 1 year spent consciously is worth more than 10 years lived unconsciously. And the measure of a life is not how early you began, but how deeply you lived once you did. The fear of being late is a distortion, a trick of the light cast by culture, media, and ego. And once you see it as such, you begin to loosen its grip. But exposing the illusion is only the first step. To truly free yourself, you must understand what replaces it. If the old story of one single clock is false, then what does real life look like when lived on your own terms? That is where we turn next, to the truth that life does not run on one universal schedule, but on countless clocks, each beating at its own rhythm. And history has already given us remarkable proof of this. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. Real life does not run on a single clock. The idea of one universal schedule, one rigid sequence of milestones, is not written into the human story. It is only written into our culture's imagination. Take history as a mirror. We admire Vera Wang as a designer of timeless dresses, yet she did not even begin designing until the age of 40. Colonel Harland Sanders, the man whose face now hangs on restaurants around the world, was 62 when he franchised his first Kentucky Fried Chicken. Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of Little House on the Prairie, published her first book in her 60s. Viktor Frankl, a man who lost nearly everything in Auschwitz, rebuilt his career after the war and wrote Man's Search for Meaning in his 40s, a book that continues to change lives long after his own. These are not exceptions meant to make us feel better. They are proof of a reality our culture ignores. The human journey unfolds in unpredictable seasons. Sometimes youth brings brilliance. Other times it is age that distills wisdom into something the world finally needs. Science confirms this multiplicity of clocks. Neuroscience has shown that the human brain retains its capacity for neuroplasticity throughout life. In 2007, researchers at Harvard demonstrated that even in older adults, the brain forms new synapses, adapts to new environments, and acquires skills previously thought impossible past childhood. The myth that you can't teach an old dog new tricks has been buried by decades of research. Biologically, you are not bound to early achievement. You are designed for continual change. Psychology adds another dimension. Daniel Levinson's Seasons of a Man's Life mapped out how human development unfolds in stages, each bringing its own crises and opportunities. What you call being late might actually be the natural rhythm of your stage. The struggles of your 30s are not the same as your 50s, and they are not meant to be. Just as nature does not rush a tree to blossom in winter, your life is not meant to mimic anyone else's flowering. But why does this matter in practice? Because when you internalize this truth, you stop measuring yourself against others and start measuring yourself against growth. If Vera Wang had believed 40 was too late, her work would not exist. If Frankl had surrendered to despair, millions would not have read his insights on meaning. Imagine what you could bring forth if you stopped asking whether the clock had expired and instead asked whether you are willing to begin. There is also a psychological trap hidden here: survivorship bias. You tend to see only the people who succeed early because culture amplifies them. But the quiet truth is that most people find stability, success, or their truest calling later. By focusing only on prodigies, you blind yourself to the deeper rhythm of ordinary human flourishing. The lesson is not to idolize late bloomers as anomalies, but to recognize that they are evidence of a broader law. Growth arrives when it is ready, not when culture demands it. So here is the practical reframe. Stop asking, "Am I late?" and start asking, "Am I willing?" Am I willing to use the years ahead rather than wasting them in paralysis? Am I willing to treat my brain, my energy, my experience as tools still alive, still capable of shaping the world? If the answer is yes, then time ceases to be a wall and becomes a resource. The poet Rilke once wrote, "No great art has ever been made without the artist having known danger. That danger includes the fear of wasted years, the dread of lost chances. But when you embrace your own timeline, you discover that even your delays, even your mistakes, have been preparation." And this brings us to the most vital truth of all. If history proves there is no single clock, then where should your attention go? Not backward to regret, not forward to imagined futures, but here to the present, because now is the only time in which life is truly lived, and that is where we must go next. Regret looks backward, fear looks forward, but action can only ever take place now. It is astonishing how much of life we waste in these two illusions, replaying what cannot be changed, rehearsing what may never happen, and in the process, abandoning the only moment that was ever truly ours. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "The present alone is what always exists, and the present is all that is ever real." In those words lies the antidote to the anxiety of being late. For lateness is always measured in relation to the past or the future. Only the present dissolves it. Consider regret. Neuroscientific studies of memory show that the brain does not store the past as a fixed recording. Instead, every time you recall an event, you are reconstructing it, often reshaping it. Regret, then, is not the past itself. It is your present mind rehearsing a story of what could have been. But no matter how often you replay the tape, the fact remains. The past has no agency over you except through your thoughts in this moment. Psychologists at Stanford have shown that reframing regret as information, a lesson to be used now, reduces its emotional weight dramatically. Regret becomes fuel when you choose to convert it into direction for the present. Now consider fear. Fear is the shadow of the future projected onto the present. Studies in cognitive neuroscience reveal that the amygdala, the brain's fear center, reacts not only to immediate threats, but also to imagined ones. When you fear failure 5 years from now, your brain responds as if it were happening today. You suffer twice, once in imagination, once if it ever arrives. The practical lesson here is profound. You can dismantle much of your suffering simply by refusing to carry imagined futures into your present. When you bring attention to now, something extraordinary happens. Regret and fear collapse into clarity. You see that the story of being too late cannot exist without reference to a past or a future. In the immediacy of the present, you are neither late nor early. You are simply here. And from here, action becomes possible. This is not just philosophy, it is practice. Mindfulness-based stress reduction programs, pioneered by Jon Kabat-Zinn, have demonstrated that focusing attention on the present reduces anxiety, improves decision-making, and even alters brain structure in regions associated with learning and memory. The present is not an abstract comfort. It is a neurological state in which your brain functions at its best. So what can you do with this? Begin small. When regret arises, pause and ask, "What can this teach me now?" When fear arises, pause and ask, "Is this happening now, or am I rehearsing a ghost?" This simple act brings you back to the only moment where change is possible. Think of it as a reorientation of your compass. Instead of navigating by the past, which is gone, or the future, which is not yet, you begin to move by the only star that never sets, the present. It is here that you plant, here that you act, here that you begin again. And the beauty is this: when you commit to now, the question, "Is it too late?" dissolves entirely. Because the moment you begin, you are on time. Always. But this raises a final transformative shift. Once you accept that now is the only ground on which life is lived, how should you think about the years ahead? How can you reframe time itself so that instead of asking, "Am I too late?" you begin asking a question that liberates you? That is what we turn to next. If I start now, where could I be in 1 year? In 5 years? This question reframes everything because it shifts you from paralysis to possibility. Psychologists call this temporal framing. Studies at Stanford and Harvard have shown that the way we phrase time-related questions changes our motivation dramatically. When people think in terms of too late, they disengage, they surrender, they do nothing. But when people think in terms of what could grow if I begin now, their sense of agency increases, their brain's reward circuitry activates, and they are far more likely to take action. The future is no longer a wall, it becomes a landscape. The truth is, time will pass whether you act or not. 5 years from now, you will be 5 years older regardless of what you do today. This is not a threat. It is liberation. Because if time will pass anyway, you may as well decide what fills it. Imagine this. 5 years ago, you thought about making a change. Perhaps it was learning a language, starting a business, returning to school, or healing an old wound. If you had begun then, you would already be living inside the fruits of that decision today. The pain of regret is not that it is too late now. The pain is realizing you could have begun sooner, but did not. And the only cure is to begin today, so that your future self will not suffer the same lament. Neuroscience supports this mindset. Research on neuroplasticity confirms that consistent small actions compound over time. London taxi drivers, studied in the late 1990s, developed larger hippocampal regions of the brain because of years spent memorizing routes. What began as practice became structural change. The lesson is clear. One choice repeated across days reshapes not only your life, but your biology. The question is never too late. The question is always, what can I begin here and now that will shape who I become? This perspective also dismantles the myth of wasted years. You may feel you lost time in jobs that drained you, in relationships that failed, in fears that froze you. But psychologists studying post-traumatic growth have shown that even suffering can be converted into resilience, clarity, and new priorities. The years behind you are not ashes, they are soil. And in that soil lie the nutrients of experience, ready to be used if you choose to plant something new. So ask yourself, if I start today, where could I be in 1 year? Not in comparison to anyone else, but compared to the version of me that stays paralyzed. If you choose action now, the years ahead become allies, not enemies. The so-called lateness disappears because you are no longer measuring yourself by someone else's clock. You are measuring by growth. And here is where I want to turn to you directly. Think of one thing you have been postponing because you thought it was too late. Just one. It could be small or grand, it doesn't matter. Hold it in your mind. Now imagine yourself 1 year from today having done it consistently. How would your life feel different? How would you feel different? I want you to answer that. Write it below in the comments. Say it clearly. If I start today, 1 year from now, I will be in better position. That sentence may be the seed that changes everything. And remember, the only clock that matters begins the moment you decide. Your story is not finished. It is just beginning the instant you choose to turn the page.